The council chamber floated in the void of space, a massive ring of metal and glass that orbited the neutral world below. Inside, representatives from 40 different species sat in their designated sections, each area modified to accommodate the unique biology of its occupants. The air hummed with translation devices, turning thousands of different sounds into comprehensible language. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the human delegation platform, his uniform crisp and clean. He had prepared for this meeting for 6 months. Beside him stood Lieutenant Sophie Blake, her tablet ready with all the necessary documents. Dr. Alan Carter, the third member of their small team, adjusted his glasses nervously. This was supposed to be simple. A trade agreement, nothing more. Across the chamber, the Velcrin delegation occupied the largest platform. They were tall creatures nearly 8 feet in height with dark gray skin that looked like stone. Their ambassador, Threxcor, sat in the center of their group like a king on a throne. His eyes glowed a dull red, and when he smiled, rows of sharp teeth became visible. Jake began his presentation. He spoke clearly about the benefits of partnership between humanity and the various species present. Humans could offer medical technology, agricultural innovations, and cultural exchange. In return, they sought access to certain trade routes and mutual defense agreements. It was reasonable. It was fair. Threxcor laughed. The sound echoed through the chamber like rocks grinding together. The weeping ones speak of partnership, Threxcor announced, his voice booming. How amusing. Tell me, human, how many worlds has your species conquered? Jake remained calm. We don't believe in conquest, Ambassador. We believe in cooperation. Cooperation, Threxcor repeated, making the word sound like an insult. A gentle word for a gentle species. The Velcrin Empire spans 300 systems. We have ruled this sector for 3,000 years, and you come here, barely 2 centuries into space travel, speaking of agreements as if you were our equals. Several other delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke against Threxcor. The Velcrin military was too powerful, their fleets too numerous. Even species that disliked them knew better than to argue. Sophie touched Jake's arm gently, a silent warning to stay calm. Jake nodded slightly. He had dealt with difficult negotiations before. This was just another challenge. We don't claim to be equals in military might, Jake said carefully. We claim to be equals in dignity. Every species deserves respect. Respect, Threxcor said, standing now. He was imposing, designed by evolution to intimidate. You want to speak of respect? Let me show you what the galaxy thinks of human dignity. He gestured to one of his aides, who activated a holographic projector. The image that appeared in the center of the chamber made Jake's blood run cold. It was footage from a human colony. New Gardens, a small settlement on the frontier. 3 months ago, pirates had attacked the colony. The local defense force had fought back, but they had been outnumbered. By the time help arrived, 40 people were dead. The footage showed the aftermath. Buildings burning, and there in the center of the image, a group of children crying over their fallen parents. Listen to that sound, Threxcor said, amplifying the audio. The sound of children weeping filled the chamber. The sound of human weakness. This is what your species does when faced with hardship. You cry, you mourn. You show emotion like it means something. Some of the other delegates looked away, uncomfortable with the display. Others watched with curiosity. A few, hoping to curry favor with the Velcrin, actually laughed along. Jake's hands tightened into fists. Sophie noticed his jaw clenching. Dr. Carter took a small step backward, his scientific mind recognizing the change in Jake's body language. You see, Threxcor continued, this is why humanity will never be a major power. You care too much. You feel too deeply. Warriors don't cry. Leaders don't show weakness. The strong survive and the weak perish. This is the law of the galaxy. The chamber had gone quiet. Even those who had been laughing stopped. Something in the atmosphere had changed. Jake Morrison stood completely still. He stared at the hologram, at the image of those crying children. His eyes began to water. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he made no effort to hide them. Threxcor's smile widened. And now the human cries himself. Perfect. Perhaps this demonstration has taught you something about your place in the galactic order. But Jake wasn't crying from sadness. Sophie recognized it immediately. She had served with Jake for 7 years. She knew what this meant. When Jake finally spoke, His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent chamber, everyone heard him. "You have no idea what you've just done." Threxcor's smile faltered slightly. Something in Jake's tone didn't match his tears. "You think our tears make us weak," Jake continued, his voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "You think our compassion is a flaw. You think because we choose peace we are incapable of war." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but more tears came. Not tears of sadness. Tears of rage that had been building since the moment those children appeared on screen. "Let me tell you something about human tears, Ambassador. We cry because we understand loss. We cry because we know the weight of what we're capable of doing. Every human in this room has ancestors who survived wars so terrible that we had to invent new words to describe the horror." The chamber was deathly silent now. Other delegates leaned forward, sensing that something important was happening. "We've fought wars with weapons that could end all life on a planet. We've created diseases that could wipe out entire species. We've built machines that could turn worlds into dust, and we did these things to each other, Ambassador, to our own kind. That's how good we are at killing." Jake's voice grew colder with each word. The tears still flowed, but his expression hardened into something that made even Threxcor uncomfortable. "We chose to stop. We chose peace. We chose compassion. Not because we couldn't destroy, but because we understood too well what destruction meant. We cry because we remember. We cry because we know what we're capable of becoming." He pulled out his communicator, a small device on his wrist. His fingers moved across the interface with absolute certainty. "You wanted to see human strength, Ambassador. You wanted to test our resolve. You used the deaths of our people, the tears of our children, as entertainment, as a lesson in weakness." Jake's finger hovered over the final button. "Let me teach you a different lesson. Let me show you what happens when humanity stops crying." He pressed the button. The transmission went out instantly, faster than light, carried by quantum-linked communicators to every human settlement, every human ship, every human government across known space. 5 words appeared on every screen in every human language, on every human world. "Send the message to Earth." Threxcor stood frozen, his smile completely gone. Around the chamber, the more knowledgeable species representatives were already standing, already preparing to leave. Ambassador Krell of the Zynthian Confederacy was frantically typing on his own communicator, sending warnings to his homeworld. Jake Morrison looked directly at Threxcor, tears still wet on his face. "You wanted to know our place in the Galactic Order, Ambassador. You're about to find out. And when this is over, every species in this chamber will understand one simple truth. When a human cries, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a warning. It means we've seen something that brought us to the edge of what we can tolerate. It means we're about to do something we'll regret." He paused, letting the words sink in. "It means the time for mercy has ended." Sophie began gathering their documents. Dr. Carter was already moving toward the exit. The human delegation was leaving, and they would not be returning to this chamber. As they walked out, Jake heard Threxcor's voice behind them, trying to sound confident but failing. "This is an empty threat. Humanity has no military to speak of. Your fleets are small, your weapons are outdated. You cannot possibly—" Jake stopped at the doorway and looked back one final time. "You're right about one thing, Ambassador. You've never seen our military. No one has. We've kept it hidden for 200 years, hoping we'd never need it again, hoping we could be better than what we were." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Thank you for ending that hope. At least now we don't have to pretend anymore." The door closed behind them, leaving the council chamber in chaos. Some delegates were demanding explanations. Others were already fleeing to their ships. Threxcor stood alone on his platform, the first seeds of doubt finally taking root in his mind. Across the galaxy, in the depths of space on hidden military stations that had been dormant for generations, ancient weapons began to wake. Soldiers who had been farmers, teachers, and artists for decades received their activation orders. Ships that had been disguised as civilian vessels began to reveal their true purpose. And on Earth, in the halls of government, military commanders who had hoped to live their entire lives without ever needing their training began to plan for war. The Velcrin Empire had ruled for 3,000 years. They were about to learn that some species are dangerous not because they love war, but because they understand it too well. The transmission reached Earth 37 minutes after Jake Morrison sent it. The quantum communicators ensured that distance meant nothing. What happened in that council chamber was instantly known across all of human space. President Ellen Hayes sat in her office in Geneva, watching the recording for the third time. She had stopped crying after the second viewing. Now she just felt cold, angry, determined. Her chief of staff, an older man named George Palmer, stood by the window. He had been in the military once, decades ago, before humanity decided to present itself as a peaceful species to the galaxy. He knew what was coming. "How long until the full assembly convenes?" Ellen asked, her voice steady. 20 minutes, Madam President. Representatives are arriving now. The mood is unified." Ellen nodded. Unified. That was a word rarely used to describe humanity's fractured political landscape. There were over 200 colony worlds, each with their own governments, their own cultures, their own interests. Getting them to agree on anything was nearly impossible. But this was different. Threxcor had made a crucial mistake. He hadn't just insulted humanity. He had mocked their dead children. He had turned grief into entertainment. There was no politics in that. No left or right, no conservative or progressive. Just raw shared fury. Lisa Yang, the most respected news correspondent in human space, was already broadcasting from outside the assembly building. Her camera drone captured the arriving delegates, and Lisa's trained eye could read their faces. "What we're seeing here is unprecedented," Lisa said into her microphone. "Delegates who haven't spoken to each other in years are arriving together. The colony worlds, Earth's government, the outer settlements all coming together. I've covered politics for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this." Inside the assembly hall, the session began. Ellen Hayes stood at the central podium, and the room fell silent immediately. "You've all seen the recording," she began. No preamble, no political niceties. "The Velcrin Empire believes we are weak. They believe our compassion makes us easy prey. They have mocked us in front of the entire Galactic Council. They have used images of our dead children as a tool of humiliation." The chamber remained silent, but Ellen could feel the anger in the air like a living thing. "For 200 years we have hidden what we truly are. We made a choice when we reached the stars. We decided to be better than we had been. We chose peace over war, negotiation over conquest. We did this because we remembered what we were capable of. We remembered what we had done to ourselves." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The time has come to remind the galaxy why we made that choice. Not because we couldn't fight. Because we could fight too well." She pressed a button and the screens around the chamber lit up. Authorization codes appeared. Codes that hadn't been used in 2 centuries. "I am opening the archives. All of them. Every ship design, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine from our past. I am activating the reserve protocols. Every citizen with military training will receive their orders within the hour. And I am authorizing the military command to begin full mobilization." A delegate from the Mars colonies stood up. His name was Raymond Fisher, and he was known as a pacifist. His voice shook as he spoke. "Madam President, I have dedicated my life to peace. I have argued against military expansion for 30 years. But I watched that recording. I saw what they did. I saw them laugh." He paused, composing himself. "I vote yes. Give them hell." One by one, the delegates stood and voiced their approval. Not a single dissenting vote, not one call for restraint or negotiation. Humanity had made its decision. Across human space, the mobilization began. Lisa Yang and her team traveled to document the transformation. Their first stop was the military archives beneath the Swiss Alps, where Dr. Henry Collins, a military historian, waited to guide them. The vault doors were massive, sealed with locks that required authorization from 3 different governments to open. When they finally swung open, the cool air that escaped carried the scent of preserved history. "What you're about to see," Dr. Collins said to Lisa's camera, "is the reason we chose peace. Every weapon in here represents a lesson we learned the hard way. Every ship design is a response to some horror we inflicted on ourselves. The first chamber contained ship blueprints, but these weren't the cargo haulers and exploration vessels that the galaxy knew. These were warships designed during humanity's bloodiest era. This is the Harbinger-class siege platform," Dr. Collins explained, pointing to a massive holographic display. "It's designed to break planetary defenses. It carries enough firepower to reduce a continent to ash in under an hour. We built 40 of them during the resource wars. We used 12 of them. The results were so devastating that we almost destroyed ourselves in the process. Lisa stared at the design. It was brutal in its efficiency. No wasted space, no unnecessary features, just weapons and engines and the systems needed to deliver death. "We mothballed these?" she asked. "We did more than that," Dr. Collins replied. "We launched them into deep space and put them in hibernation mode. Scattered them across the outer reaches of our territory. The galaxy thinks we have no military infrastructure. They're wrong. We have more military power than any three empires combined. We just kept it sleeping." The next chamber contained weapon systems. Lisa's camera captured rows upon rows of devices, each labeled with clinical efficiency. Kinetic bombardment platforms, nanoweapon packages, something called a gray protocol device that Dr. Collins refused to explain in detail. "Some things," he said quietly, "are better left as threats than demonstrations." The tour continued. Each chamber revealed another aspect of humanity's hidden arsenal. But it wasn't just the weapons that shocked Lisa. It was the organization, the planning, the sheer level of preparation that had gone into this secret military infrastructure. "We never stopped being soldiers," Dr. Collins explained. "We just stopped advertising it. Every civilian ship has military-grade engines. Every colony has hidden weapon platforms. Every citizen receives basic tactical training in school, disguised as emergency preparedness courses. We told ourselves it was just in case, just for defense." He looked directly at the camera, but we all knew deep down what it really was. We knew that someday someone would push us too far. And when that happened, we would need to be ready. On the agricultural colony of New Terra, Greg Patterson received his activation notice while harvesting wheat. He was 47 years old, hadn't worn a uniform in 20 years, and had hoped he never would again. But he read the brief message, looked at the orders, and felt something old stir inside him. His wife, Kate, found him in the barn an hour later, packing his gear. She didn't ask if he had to go. She had received the same training. She knew what the activation codes meant. "How long?" she asked. "Until it's done," Greg replied. "Could be weeks. Could be months. The orders say to prepare for extended deployment," Kate nodded. She had known this day might come. Every military spouse did. "Come back," she said simply. "I will," Greg promised. He meant it. But he also knew that war made liars of even the most honest men. Across the colonies, similar scenes played out. Fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, people who had spent years building peaceful lives now preparing for war. The response rate was 98%. Almost every reservist reported for duty within 24 hours. Lisa Young's team visited a military mustering station on Europa. Thousands of people were arriving, most of them looking slightly confused to be wearing uniforms again. But as they were processed, assigned to units, and began retraining, something changed in their bearing. The civilian softness faded. The soldier underneath, dormant but not dead, emerged. Commander Lucy Price, overseeing the mustering process, spoke to Lisa's camera with professional efficiency. "People think that becoming a soldier is about learning to fight. That's wrong. Becoming a soldier is about accepting that sometimes violence is necessary. These people never stopped being soldiers. They just got permission to pretend they weren't. Now the pretending is over." The Velcrin Empire watched the human mobilization with amusement. Their intelligence services sent regular reports to Threxcor, who shared them with his military commanders. The reports were dismissive. Humans had no real military tradition. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were primitive. This was clearly a bluff, a desperate attempt to save face after being humiliated, but not everyone was so certain. Ambassador Krell of the Zynthian Confederacy had spent years studying human history. He had read their literature, watched their entertainment, analyzed their culture, and what he found terrified him. He sent an urgent message to his government marked with the highest priority: withdraw all assets from Velcrin-aligned space immediately. Do not, under any circumstances, allow ourselves to be drawn into this conflict. I have reviewed human military history extensively. What they did to each other before reaching the stars should serve as a warning. They developed weapons capable of destroying their own species and came within days of using them. They fought wars that killed billions over resources, ideology, and pride. They created artificial intelligence specifically designed to maximize casualties. They poisoned their own planet multiple times and survived through sheer stubbornness. The message continued. The Velcrin War Council met in the Grand Chamber on their home world. Threxkor stood before the military commanders, his confidence unshaken despite the warnings from some of the more cautious species. War Master Kreltok, commander of the Velkrine battle fleets, listened to the intelligence reports with growing impatience. "The humans are mobilizing old cargo ships," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "They are calling up farmers and merchants to play soldier. This is not a military threat. This is desperation," Threxkor agreed. "We must strike quickly before they waste more resources on this pathetic display. I recommend we hit one of their agricultural colonies, something remote, lightly defended. Show them the cost of defiance. Once they see what real military power looks like, they will beg for mercy." The War Council approved the plan unanimously. They selected New Haven, a farming colony in the outer reaches of human space. Population 50,000. Defenses minimal. Strategic value low. It was perfect for sending a message. War Master Kreltok assembled a fleet. 20 warships, including 3 dreadnoughts. It was massive overkill for a farming colony. But the Velkrine wanted to make a statement. They wanted humanity to understand the futility of resistance. The fleet entered jump space, confident and ready. They would arrive at New Haven in 3 days, destroy the colony's defenses, and force a surrender. The entire operation would take less than a week. They had no idea they were jumping into a trap. Captain Nicole Grant stood on the bridge of the UECS Defender, watching the sensor displays with calm focus. Her ship was small by military standards, a destroyer that the galaxy would consider outdated. She had a crew of 200, most of them reservists who had been civilians just 2 weeks ago. The Defender was the only visible human military ship in the New Haven system. To any observer, it looked like token resistance, a single destroyer against a Velkrine battle fleet. Suicide. "Captain?" Her sensor officer, a young man named Kevin Torres, called out. "Jump signatures detected. Multiple contacts counting. 20 ships. 3 are dreadnought class," Nicole nodded. "Right on schedule." The Velkrine were predictable. They always brought overwhelming force. They always announced their arrival. They always demanded surrender. "Open a channel to the colony," Nicole ordered. "Tell them to proceed to the shelters. Full lockdown protocol." Her executive officer, Commander Sam Mitchell, moved to stand beside her chair. He was older, a veteran who had seen actual combat during the last pirate incursion 15 years ago. He kept his voice low. "We're really doing this? 1 ship against 20? Nicole smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. "We're not alone, Sam. We just look like we are. Trust the plan." The Velkrine fleet dropped out of jump space in perfect formation. War Master Kreltok immediately ordered his communications officer to hail the human ship. The face that appeared on his screen was a human woman, young, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She wore the uniform of a human naval officer, and she looked completely unafraid. "This is Captain Nicole Grant of the United Earth Colonial Ship Defender. You have entered human territory without authorization. Leave now," Kreltok laughed. "1 ship. You face me with 1 ship. Human, I have 20 vessels. I have enough firepower to crack your planet's crust. Surrender your colony immediately or we will take it by force." Nicole's expression didn't change. "I gave you a chance to leave. You should have taken it." She cut the transmission before Kreltok could respond. "All ships," Kreltok ordered his fleet. "Target that destroyer. Disable it, but keep it intact. I want prisoners. I want to show the galaxy what happens to humans who challenge the Velkrine Empire." The fleet moved forward, weapons charging. They expected the destroyer to run or surrender. Instead, it accelerated directly toward them. "Is the human insane?" one of Kreltok's officers asked. "Perhaps," Kreltok replied. "But it doesn't matter, fire." The Velkrine fleet opened up with everything they had. Energy weapons lanced through space, enough firepower to vaporize a dozen ships the size of the Defender. But the Defender wasn't where it was supposed to be. The ship moved like nothing the Velkrine had ever seen. It twisted, dove, and accelerated with impossible precision. The human vessel wasn't just fast. It was unpredictable. Its computer systems were making calculations and corrections thousands of times per second, using combat algorithms developed during humanity's bloodiest wars. "How is it moving like that?" Kreltok demanded. His tactical officer frantically analyzed the data. "Their engine efficiency is far beyond what our intelligence indicated. And their maneuvering thrusters, they're using something we haven't seen before, plasma bursts for micro-corrections. It's incredibly wasteful of energy, but it gives them maneuverability we can't match. The Defender fired back, not with energy weapons, which the Velcrin shields could handle, but with kinetic rounds traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles were simple, dense metal slugs accelerated by magnetic rails. No explosive warheads, no complex technology, just mass and velocity. The first round punched through a Velcrin cruiser's shields like they weren't there. The shield generators were designed to dissipate energy, not stop solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The slug tore through the ship from bow to stern, the kinetic energy alone causing catastrophic damage. The cruiser exploded. 19 ships remained. Impossible, Kreltok whispered. One shot. One ship destroyed. His fleet adjusted, focusing their fire on the area where the Defender would have to be based on its last trajectory. But the ship wasn't there. It had changed course again, using those impossible plasma thrusters to alter its momentum in ways that violated every tactical doctrine the Velcrin knew. Another railgun shot. Another Velcrin ship with a hole punched clean through it. 18 ships, all vessels, scatter formation. Kreltok ordered. Don't let it line up shots. But scattering was exactly what Nicole wanted. She had been leading them away from the planet, drawing them out, spreading them thin, and now, 42 minutes into the battle, the real trap sprung. Kevin Torres, the sensor officer, allowed himself a small smile. Captain, the packages are active, Nicole nodded. Light them up. Across the outer system, in positions the Velcrin had dismissed as empty space, stealth platforms activated. These were Harbinger-class siege units, the same designs Dr. Collins had shown Lisa Yang in the archives. Humanity had placed them here 3 months ago, long before the Galactic Council meeting, long before Threxcor's insult, just in case. The Velcrin had scanned the system when they arrived. Their sensors had shown nothing unusual, but human stealth technology was generations ahead of what the galaxy expected. The platforms had been there all along, silent and waiting. Now they spoke. The first Harbinger platform fired a weapon the Velcrin had never encountered. It was called a particle lance, a focused beam of accelerated exotic particles that didn't just damage ships, but destabilized the atomic bonds in their hulls. The Velcrin dreadnought it hit didn't explode. It simply came apart like a sandcastle in the wind. 17 ships. The second platform used a different approach. It launched what looked like simple missiles, but each one carried a swarm of nanomachines programmed with a single purpose: consume metal. When they hit the Velcrin ships, they began to spread, eating through hull plating, disabling systems, turning warships into hollow shells. 2 more Velcrin vessels went dark. 15 ships, Kreltok finally understood. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The humans had known they were coming. They had prepared the battlefield. They had turned the entire system into a killing ground. Retreat, he ordered. All ships jump to emergency coordinates. But jumping required time to calculate coordinates and charge the drives. Time the Velcrin no longer had. The Defender, seemingly suicidal in its aggression, was now systematically preventing ships from disengaging. Every time a vessel tried to fall back to jump distance, the Defender was there, firing those terrible kinetic rounds, forcing them to maneuver, preventing them from escaping. The Harbinger platforms continued their methodical destruction. No wasted shots, no unnecessary damage. Each weapon was designed to kill ships with maximum efficiency. This was what humanity had learned from centuries of warfare. How to destroy completely, thoroughly and without mercy. Kreltok's flagship, the Pride of Velcrin, shuddered as a kinetic round grazed its shields. The War Master grabbed his communication station. To any Velcrin vessel, he transmitted on all frequencies. They fight like nothing we've encountered. They don't seek honor. They don't want surrender. They want extinction. Send warning to the Empire. Tell them the humans are not what we thought. Tell them a particle lance hit the Pride of Velcrin. The ship's structure began to fail, systems shutting down one by one. Kreltok had time for one final thought before the bridge lost atmosphere. We were wrong about them. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it ended, the Defender was heavily damaged, her hull scarred by energy weapon impacts, 2 of her engines offline. But she was intact. Her crew was alive. Of the 20 Velcrin ships, none survived. Some were destroyed so completely that only debris fields remained. Others floated dead in space. their crews dead from exposure when the nano-weapons disabled life support. A few had tried to surrender, but Nicole had ignored the transmissions. The Velcrin Empire's response to the disaster at New Haven was exactly what humanity expected: overwhelming force. Within 2 weeks of the battle, the Empire mobilized the largest fleet in recorded galactic history. 10,000 warships pulled from every sector they controlled. It was an armada designed to crush humanity so completely that no other species would ever dare challenge Velcrin authority again. The Velcrin High Command held a public ceremony, broadcast across the galaxy. Their emperor, a massive creature named Vexthor, addressed the assembled species with absolute confidence. "The humans have shown they possess some military capability," he announced, his voice echoing through translation devices. "But they are one species with limited territory. We are an empire spanning 300 systems, with allies and subject races numbering in the billions. They destroyed one fleet through trickery. We will answer with power they cannot imagine." The Velcrin expected this show of force to intimidate humanity into surrender. Instead, it triggered the full implementation of human military doctrine. And that doctrine was based on a simple principle: when facing superior numbers, don't fight fair. Commander Paul Rogers stood on the bridge of the UECS Relentless, studying the tactical displays. His ship was a carrier, one of 50 that had been disguised as bulk transport vessels. Each one carried a full wing of attack craft, weapons systems, and marines. The Relentless alone had more firepower than some entire planetary defense fleets. Paul was 43, a career officer who had spent the last 15 years pretending to run cargo routes. Now finally he could stop pretending. His orders were simple: disrupt Velcrin supply lines. No honor duels. No fair fights. Hit them where they were weak, destroy what they needed, and disappear before they could respond. "Sir," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Danny Walsh, reported, "we have positive identification on the target. Velcrin Supply Depot, 3 light-years inside their territory. 16 cargo vessels, minimal escort. 2 destroyers, both older models." Paul nodded. "Perfect. Let's show them what happens when they leave their supply lines undefended. Helm, take us in. Silent running until we're in range." The Relentless and her escort ships dropped out of jump space at the edge of the system, far enough out that the Velcrin sensors wouldn't immediately detect them. Then they went dark, shutting down all non-essential systems, drifting on momentum alone. They looked like debris, like nothing worth investigating. The Velcrin depot was busy with activity. Cargo ships loaded with ammunition, food, fuel, and replacement parts for the massive fleet being assembled. The supplies that would let that fleet operate deep in human territory for months. All of it in one convenient location. Paul waited until the Relentless was in optimal firing position. Then he gave the order: all ships weapons free. Primary targets are the cargo vessels. Secondary targets are the escorts. Light them up. The human ships came alive all at once. The Relentless launched her attack craft, small but deadly ships that swarmed toward the depot like angry hornets. The escort destroyers fired their kinetic weapons, the same type that had devastated the Velcrin fleet at New Haven, and the carrier itself unleashed a barrage of missiles, each one carrying a nuclear warhead. The Velcrin defenders had approximately 45 seconds of warning. Not enough time to get their shields to full power. Not enough time to coordinate a defense. Not enough time to call for help. The first cargo ship exploded when a kinetic round punched through its fuel tanks. The resulting fireball consumed 2 nearby ships. The human attack craft systematically targeted the remaining cargo vessels, ignoring the destroyers. Destroy the supplies first. Without supplies, the fleet can't fight. One of the Velcrin destroyers managed to get a shot off, an energy beam that scored a hit on a human attack craft. The small ship's shields absorbed most of the damage, but it was knocked off course. Its pilot, a young woman named Beth Cooper, corrected her trajectory and launched 2 missiles in response. Both hit. The destroyer's bridge exploded. 8 minutes after the attack began, it was over. All 16 cargo ships were destroyed. Both Velcrin destroyers were disabled or destroyed, and the human fleet was already jumping away, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. Paul watched the tactical display as they entered jump space. Casualties: 3 attack craft damaged, 1 severely. No fatalities. Lieutenant Cooper's ship will need repairs, but she got it back to the bay. Paul nodded. 1 attack, 1 supply depot destroyed. The Velcrin fleet would feel this loss. And this was just one target. Across a dozen sectors, other human ships were conducting similar raids. The Velkrin called it cowardice. Humanity called it tactics. The attack spread like wildfire. Human ships appeared without warning, struck hard, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They didn't fight the way the Velkrin expected. There were no formal fleet engagements, no grand battles where superior numbers could make a difference. Just constant, relentless harassment. Shipyards building new Velkrin vessels suddenly exploded, sabotaged by human infiltration teams. Trade routes were seeded with mines that looked like common asteroids. Supply convoys required massive escorts, which meant fewer ships available for offensive operations. The Velkrin Empire, so confident in their military superiority, found themselves fighting a war they didn't understand. Ambassador Krell addressed the Galactic Council again. His people had already withdrawn all their assets from Velkrin space, and he wanted the other species to understand why. "This is not a conventional war," he explained to the assembled delegates. "The humans are not trying to conquer territory. They are systematically destroying the Velkrin Empire's ability to function. They are attacking infrastructure, supply lines, communications networks. They are fighting the way their ancestors fought each other. Total war. And the Velkrin have no defense against it because they've never encountered an enemy willing to fight this way." One delegate, representing a species allied with the Velkrin, stood up angrily. "You call this honor? They attack civilians, destroy trade ships, refuse to meet us in open battle. This is not warfare. This is terrorism." Krell turned to face the delegate. "Ask yourself why humanity is fighting this way." The Velkrin mocked them for showing mercy, for caring about their people, for choosing peace. "You wanted to see what happens when humans stop being merciful. This is the answer. Be very, very careful what you wish for." The delegate sat down, looking uncertain. Around the chamber, other species that had allied with the Velkrin began to reconsider their positions. Some started sending quiet diplomatic messages to human representatives, asking about terms of neutrality. The Velkrin Empire, however, refused to acknowledge the threat. Their pride wouldn't allow it. They continued massing their fleet, determined to find the main human force and destroy it in one decisive battle. They didn't understand that there was no main force to find. Humanity had learned through bitter experience that concentrated forces made easy targets. Their fleets were distributed, mobile, and independent. The war reached a turning point at the Battle of Threshold Station. The station was a major Velkrin military hub, a massive orbital fortress that coordinated fleet movements for an entire sector. Taking it would be a significant blow to Velkrin command and control. It was also heavily defended by over 200 ships and weapons platforms, capable of destroying anything that came within range. The human fleet that arrived was small by comparison. 30 ships led by Admiral Chris Bennett aboard the dreadnought UECS Reckoning. The Velkrin defenders were confident. 30 ships against 200 plus the station's defenses. This was finally the fair fight they had been seeking. Admiral Bennett, a gray-haired veteran who had commanded ships during the last pirate wars, studied the tactical situation with cold calculation. He had no intention of fighting fair. "Launch the drones," he ordered. From the human ships, thousands of small objects deployed. The Velkrin sensors identified them as combat drones, automated attack craft. Nothing special. Nothing to worry about. The station's point defense systems could handle drones, except these weren't normal drones. They were equipped with the same stealth technology that had hidden the Harbinger platforms at New Haven, and they carried nano-weapon packages, the same kind that had disabled Velkrin ships in previous engagements. The drones scattered, moving on random trajectories that made them hard to track and harder to hit. The Velkrin fired at them, destroying dozens, but thousands more got through. When they reached the station, they didn't explode. They attached themselves to the hull like parasites and began releasing their nanomachines. The effect wasn't immediate. It took 20 minutes for the nanomachines to spread through the station's systems, but once they did, the results were catastrophic. Weapon systems shut down. Life support failed. Communications went dark. The mighty fortress, pride of the Velkrin military, became a tomb orbiting its planet. The Velkrin ships, seeing the station fall, broke formation in confusion. Some tried to retreat. Others charged at the human fleet in rage. Admiral Bennett let them come. "All ships execute Wolfpack Pattern 7, he commanded. The human fleet split into 6 groups, each moving independently. The Velkrin, expecting a unified front, suddenly found themselves facing attacks from multiple directions. And the human ships didn't stay to. The Velcrin fleet assembled in the dead space between sectors, a gathering of military might that had never been equaled in galactic history. 5,000 warships ranging from small frigates to massive dreadnoughts, every vessel the Empire could spare, every crew that could be mustered, all focused on a single objective: the complete destruction of Earth. Emperor Vex Thor addressed his fleet commanders via hollow communication, his voice carrying the weight of desperation disguised as determination. The humans believe they can defeat us through cowardice and tricks. They attack our supply lines, avoid direct confrontation, hide behind their cunning. But they have one weakness: they care about their homeworld. When we appear in Earth's orbit with 5,000 ships, they will have no choice but to surrender or watch their planet die. The plan was simple: jump to Earth, establish orbital superiority, and demand immediate unconditional surrender. If the humans refused, begin bombardment. Show the galaxy that the Velcrin Empire could not be defeated by a species barely 2 centuries into space travel. What the Velcrin didn't know was that humanity had been monitoring their communications for weeks. Every encrypted message, every strategic discussion, every fleet movement. Human intelligence services, refined during centuries of warfare against each other, had cracked Velcrin security protocols within days of the war beginning. Admiral Chris Bennett sat in the command center on Mars, watching the Velcrin fleet movements on the strategic display. President Ellen Hayes stood beside him, her face grave but determined. Around them, dozens of military officers coordinated the defense of humanity's home system. "They're moving exactly as predicted," Admiral Bennett said quietly. 5,000 ships. They'll jump to Earth orbit in approximately 6 hours. Ellen nodded. "And our forces?" 300 ships in Earth orbit. Another 200 scattered throughout the system. "They'll think we're outnumbered 10 to 1. "We are outnumbered 10 to 1, Ellen pointed out. Admiral Bennett smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Numbers only matter in a fair fight, Madam President. And we stopped fighting fair the moment they mocked our dead children." He turned to his communications officer. "Send the activation codes. All defense platforms, all hidden assets, everything we've prepared. It's time to show the galaxy what humanity really is." Across the Sol system, weapons platforms that had been disguised as satellites and space debris came online. Stealth ships hiding in the asteroid belt revealed themselves. And deep in the outer system, beyond the orbit of Neptune, something massive began to move. The Harbinger siege platforms, 40 of them, had been waiting in the dark for 200 years. Now they received their activation codes and began the long burn toward Earth. They wouldn't arrive in time for the initial battle, but that was fine. They weren't meant for the battle. They were meant for what came after. 6 hours later, the Velcrin fleet dropped out of jump space in Earth orbit. War Master Drexmal, commanding the assault, immediately ordered his ships into formation. They spread out in a sphere around the planet, weapons charged, ready to demonstrate overwhelming superiority. The human fleet waited for them. 300 ships against 5,000. To any observer, it looked like suicide. Drexmal opened a channel to Earth. His message was broadcast on all frequencies, meant to be heard by every human in the system and across the galaxy. Humans of Earth. You are surrounded. You are outnumbered. You cannot win this battle. Surrender now. Submit to Velcrin authority and your planet will be spared. Refuse and we will reduce your homeworld to ash. You have 1 hour to respond. The response came not from Earth's government, but from Admiral Bennett's flagship, the UX Reckoning, moving into position at the front of the human formation. War Master Drexmal, this is Admiral Chris Bennett of the United Earth Colonial Fleet. We have no intention of surrendering. We do, however, have a counteroffer for you. Drexmal laughed, the sound echoing through his bridge. You offer terms? You are outnumbered. What could you possibly offer? A chance to leave, Bennett replied simply.
Take your fleet and jump away.
Return to Velcrin Prime, end this war. Because if you stay, if you fire a single shot at Earth, you will force us to do something we hoped we would never have to do again. And what is that? Bennett's voice went cold. Show you what total war really means. Last chance, War Master. Leave now. Drexmal cut the transmission. He turned to his weapons officer. Target their flagship, fire. The order was given, and everything changed. The moment the Velcrin fleet fired their first shot, Every hidden human asset in the Sol system activated simultaneously. What the Velcrin had thought was empty space suddenly filled with weapons platforms. What they had dismissed as civilian satellites revealed themselves as combat stations. And the 300 human ships that had seemed so outnumbered suddenly weren't alone. The first wave hit the Velcrin fleet from every direction. Kinetic weapons, particle beams, nuclear missiles, and things the Velcrin had never seen before. The humans weren't trying to win through superior numbers. They were trying to win through superior preparation. But even with the hidden assets, the Velcrin still had the advantage in raw firepower. The battle raged across Earth orbit, ships exploding on both sides. The Velcrin pushed forward, taking casualties but making progress. They would pay a heavy price, but they would reach Earth. They would make the humans surrender. And then Admiral Bennett gave the order that would end the war. All ships, execute emergency jump. Authorization Bennett Delta 7. Jump coordinates are Velcrin Prime. Drexmal, monitoring human communications, felt his blood run cold. What, they're retreating? But they're jumping toward... The human fleet in Earth orbit vanished. All 300 ships jumping simultaneously, leaving the battle behind. The Velcrin had won the battle for Earth orbit. But Admiral Bennett had never intended to defend Earth. He had intended to draw the Velcrin fleet away from their home world. The human ships dropped out of jump space and orbit around Velcrin Prime. The planet was defended but weakly. Most of the Empire's military strength was at Earth, exactly as Bennett had planned. The Velcrin homeworld had approximately 300 defending ships and orbital defense platforms. Against a human fleet that had spent weeks training for this exact scenario, Emperor Vexthor on the surface of Velcrin Prime watched in horror as human ships appeared in his skies. "How?" he whispered. "How did they jump past our defenses?" The answer was simple. Humanity had been studying Velcrin jump technology for years. They had refined it, improved it, made it more accurate. The jump the human fleet had just performed was so dangerous that 15 ships had been lost in the process, torn apart by gravitational forces. But it had worked. The human fleet was exactly where it needed to be. Admiral Bennett broadcast his message to the entire Velcrin homeworld. "Emperor Vexthor, people of the Velcrin Empire, your fleet is at Earth, attacking a world they cannot destroy because we evacuated the population to underground shelters weeks ago. They are fighting over an empty prize while we stand above your home. You have demanded our surrender. Instead, I offer you this choice." He paused, letting the weight of the situation sink in. "Surrender now. Dismantle your empire. Submit to human oversight and galactic judgment, or we deploy the Grey Protocol and your civilization ends today." The Emperor's voice shook with rage and fear. "You bluff. You would not dare use weapons of mass destruction on a civilian population. Your precious compassion would not allow it." "You're right," Bennett admitted. "We won't kill your people. The Grey Protocol doesn't destroy life. It destroys technology. Within hours of deployment, every advanced system on your world will cease to function. Your power grids, your ships, your computers, all of it will be reduced to base components. You will survive, Emperor, but your empire will fall. You will go from ruling the stars to barely surviving on a single world." Silence on the channel. The Emperor was calculating, trying to find a way out. His fleet was too far away to help. His defenses were inadequate, and the humans had already demonstrated their willingness to use any weapon necessary. "This is barbaric," the Emperor finally said. "To attack a civilization's infrastructure, to set us back thousands of years. This is not war. This is genocide of culture." "No," Bennett replied, his voice hard. "Genocide is what you threatened to do to Earth. This is justice. You started this war by mocking our dead. You escalated it by threatening our home. And now you will pay the price. Not with your lives, because we are better than that, but with your empire." The Emperor had no response. He looked around his throne room, at the technology that had defined his people for millennia. All of it about to become dust. Before he could answer, Drexmal's voice came through on an emergency channel. The War Master had realized what was happening, realized that his fleet had been lured away, that Velcrin Prime was undefended. His voice was defeated. "My Emperor, we cannot return in time. We are 8 hours from home and the humans have already won. I recommend surrender." The Emperor slumped in his throne. 3,000 years of dominance ending in a single moment of miscalculation. They had underestimated humanity. They had mistaken compassion for weakness. And now they would pay the price. "We surrender." the Emperor said, his voice barely audible. Admiral Bennett nodded. 3 months after the surrender, Dr. Alan Carter walked through the streets of the Velcrin capital city. The transformation was shocking. Where once there had been floating vehicles and holographic advertisements, now people traveled on foot or in simple wheeled carts. Where massive towers had reached toward the sky, many now stood dark and silent, their power systems disabled. The Gray Protocol had not been deployed. That was important to understand. Admiral Bennett had held back, given the Velcrin a chance to surrender before using the ultimate weapon. But the threat of it had been enough. The Velcrin Empire had dismantled itself rather than face technological annihilation. Still, the occupation was not gentle. Human forces controlled all major Velcrin worlds, ensuring that the military could not reform. Shipyards had been destroyed or converted to civilian production. Weapons factories had been shut down. The once mighty empire had been reduced to a collection of isolated worlds, each under human supervision. Alan was part of the Occupation Authority, specifically the Cultural Transition Team. His job was to help the Velcrin adapt to their new reality, while ensuring they understood why it had happened. It was delicate work, walking the line between occupation and assistance. He met with a Velcrin scholar named Threxnall in what had once been the Empire's greatest museum of military history. The holographic displays were dark now, the weapons of conquest silent. Threxnall had been one of the few Velcrin intellectuals who had argued against the war, not because he liked humans but because he had actually studied them. "Your people are efficient conquerors," Threxnall said, his voice bitter. "You defeated us completely in less than 2 months of active warfare. You destroyed an empire that stood for 3,000 years. Alan nodded slowly. "We didn't want to. We tried for 200 years to be your partners, your friends. We showed you compassion, offered cooperation, sought peaceful coexistence. And we mocked you for it," Threxnall admitted. "We thought your tears meant weakness. We were wrong." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the dark remnants of Velcrin pride. "Why didn't you destroy us?" Threxnall finally asked. "You had the power. Your Gray Protocol could have rendered every piece of technology on this world into dust. You could have killed us all with those other weapons I've heard about. Why show mercy at the end when you showed none during the war?" Alan thought about how to answer that. It was a question many people were asking, not just Velcrin but other species as well. How could humanity be so ruthlessly efficient in war but still hold back from complete destruction? "Because that's not who we are," Alan said finally. "We wage war to end threats, not to exterminate species. Once the Velcrin Empire surrendered, you were no longer a threat. At that point, killing you would have served no purpose except revenge. And revenge is not justice, but you destroyed our empire, our culture, everything that made us who we were." "No," Alan corrected gently. "We destroyed your ability to threaten others. Your culture, your history, your identity as a people still exists. You just can't use it to conquer anymore. You'll rebuild, slower this time, without the military dominance you relied on. And maybe, when you reach the stars again, you'll do it as partners rather than conquerors." Threxnall made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You really believe that? You think we'll just forget 3,000 years of military tradition? I think you'll remember what happened when you pushed too far. Every time a Velcrin looks at the sky and remembers that your empire once spanned hundreds of worlds, they'll also remember how quickly it fell." That's a powerful lesson, one that will shape your culture for generations. They walked through the museum, past displays of ancient weapons and victories that now seemed hollow. Threxnall stopped at a particular exhibit showing the conquest of the Xinthian homeworld, 2,000 years ago. "We were proud of this," he said quietly. "We took their world in 7 days, crushed their defenses, occupied their cities. We thought it showed our strength." "And now?" Alan asked. "Now I understand why Ambassador Krell tried to warn us. His people remember. They remember what it's like to face overwhelming military force. They recognized what you were because they had been on the receiving end of something similar from us." Threxnall turned to face Alan directly. "The difference is that you stopped." "We would not have." Alan had no response to that. It was probably true. Back on Earth, Lisa Yang was preparing a documentary about the war. She had been granted access to military records, interviews with commanders, and footage from battles. What she was discovering shocked her. Even though she had reported on the war as it happened, the level of planning was extraordinary. Humanity had been preparing for this possibility for 200 years. Every colony had hidden weapons. Every civilian ship had military capabilities. Every citizen had training. The entire species had been maintaining a war machine while pretending to be peaceful traders and explorers. She interviewed Admiral Bennett in his office on Mars. The Admiral looked tired, older than his years. Victory had not brought him joy, only relief that it was over. "When did you know it would come to this?" Lisa asked. "When did you realize we would have to fight?" Bennett thought for a long moment. "Honestly, the moment we made first contact with the Velkrin, 60 years ago. I was a junior officer then, part of the delegation. I watched them, studied how they interacted with other species. They ruled through intimidation and force. They respected only strength. I knew even then that someday they would test us, and when they did, we would need to be ready. So all of this, the hidden weapons, the distributed fleet strategy, the Gray Protocol, all of it was planned decades in advance? Longer than that. The basic strategy was developed 150 years ago, right after we established our first colony worlds. The reasoning was simple. We're expanding into a galaxy we don't understand, full of species we don't know. Some will be friendly, some won't. We needed to be prepared for the worst while hoping for the best." Lisa made a note. "And the Gray Protocol specifically? When was that developed?" Bennett's expression darkened. "That's classified at the highest level. But I can tell you this. It was created during Earth's last major war, the one we don't talk about. The one that almost destroyed us. We swore we would never use weapons like that again. But we also swore we would never forget how to make them, just in case. Do you regret what we did? The way we fought?" "Every day," Bennett admitted. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the lives lost, both human and Velkrin. I regret that we had to show the galaxy our capacity for violence. But I don't regret defending our people. I don't regret protecting our homes. And I don't regret making sure that no other species will make the same mistake the Velkrin did." On the colony world of New Haven, where the war had truly begun, Captain Nicole Grant attended a memorial service for the 43 crew members she had lost during the first battle. The colony had built a monument, a simple stone structure with the names of all the defenders who had died protecting the settlement. Nicole stood before the monument, her uniform crisp despite the heat. Around her, colonists gathered, many of them families of the crew who had died. She had written letters to each family. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, approached her. She held a small flower, one of the native plants that grew in the colony's gardens. "You knew my dad," the girl said quietly. "Lieutenant Kevin Torres. He was on your ship." Nicole knelt down to the girl's level. She remembered Kevin. Young, brilliant, one of the best sensor officers she had ever worked with. He had died when a Velkrin energy beam had breached the defender's hull. Quick, at least. He hadn't suffered. "I did know your dad," Nicole said gently. "He was very brave. He helped save everyone on this colony." The girl nodded, trying to be strong. "Mom says he's a hero. That he helped win the war. Your mom is right. He was a hero. And I'm sorry he's not here." The girl placed the flower at the base of the monument, adding it to the dozens already there. Then she looked back at Nicole with eyes too old for her age. "Did they cry?" she asked. "The Velkrin. When we beat them. Did they cry like we did?" Nicole thought about the Velkrin prisoners she had recovered from the battle. Some had been defiant. Some had been shocked. A few had wept, though whether from pain, fear, or grief she couldn't say. "Yes," Nicole answered honestly. "They cried too. War makes everyone cry eventually. That's one of the terrible things about it." The girl absorbed this information with a seriousness that broke Nicole's heart. This child, who should have been playing and learning and growing up in peace, now understood war in a way no child should. Across the galaxy, the new order was taking shape. The Galactic Council, reformed under the human-proposed charter, established new rules for interstellar conduct. Wars of conquest were forbidden. Disputes had to go through mediation before military action, and humanity, whether they wanted it or not, had become the enforcer of these rules. Jake Morrison, now the official human ambassador to the Galactic Council, found himself in a position he had never wanted. He was essentially the most powerful diplomat in known space. When he spoke, species listened, not because they liked humanity, but because they feared what would happen if they didn't. He sat in his office at the council station,